I spent my formative years in Lazenby, near Redcar, and in the 1960s I took a great many photographs, black and white, of Lazenby, Lazenby and Wilton, and indeed Kirkleatham. That was 50 years ago, so I just thought I'd go back and have a look at the whole thing again and see how they are in 2013. It's just an historical record, really. It's just something I fancied doing. It may be of no interest to anybody except those who live in the area, or who did live in the area. So this video, and I may not be able to get it all on one, but these videos then are essentially about those villages which were part of the Wilton estate. This is Lazenby as it was in 1967. This is a little plan of the original village. This is Lazenby Farm in the 1940s. A family called Holmes lived there. In fact, it was known as Holmes Farm, but ICI eventually took it over. This is Parrington Farm, which has since long been demolished. A family called Lamberts lived there. This is an orchard belonging to a Mrs. Macfall. Chapel House, a family called Fruin lived there, but it's subsequently been demolished. And I think Lazenby Club has been built in there together with these two houses. This one used to be the curate's house for Wilton Church. This one was built by a family called Robbins, who used to live in Wilton Green. This was where Charles Turner lived, who was the owner of Farmers' Friends. And they had a place down here. This was their yard here, and in last year 2012 they sold up and now disappeared. This farm and those buildings there were farmed, was the base for Moore's farm. There was no farmhouse as such, it was just a stackyard and a few buildings. This was Pasture Lane, which originally went down to the river, an area called the Slems, but with the building of ICI and Dorman Long Steelworks, which became British Steel, that was blocked off. But what was quite interesting is down here were a couple of buildings which Moors used as part of their farm buildings. They were called the powder houses, and in the early days of mining, miners had to buy their own sticks of explosive and black powder, and this was where it was kept, well away from the village. And unlike most farm buildings, one of these had a wooden floor in it. This is the Pasture Lane Parrington Place development, which took place in 1951-1952. and this came in 1954. This was the Grange Estate development. A dreadful thing, made out of breeze block. It looked absolutely awful. These houses, these Sunstone Houses here, used to be, well, long before my time, maybe before the turn of the century for that matter, a pub called the Old Oak. And these houses here were built about 1890, and they were, this area here was an open space. And one of the very old residents of Lazenby village told me that this was this was the scene of many a drunken brawl, this open space here. These little houses here were quite interesting because they were about 20 feet below the road level. Miss Winterly used to live down there, and Makins and Hemmingsleys lived in there. Mr. Makin, he kept bees, I remember, and he'd been a conscientious objector during the war. And some of the old villagers ostracised him. Anyway, they were demolished in the 1950s, and these people moved into the Parrington Place development, and this area here was levelled off, and there's now a little garden. And these houses down here were Queen Street West. Hogarth's, a family lived down there, and they were demolished as well, but the sign Queen Street West is still on the edge of this, on this alleyway here. This is the original institute. It had a changing room for sport, for the footballers. But it was also the scene of many celebrations, such as the coronation, and the Women's Institute used to meet there, and they used to put on shows, all singing, all dancing shows with Mrs. Hardwick and Mrs. Hayne and others. Good entertainment. This is the original school, which was built in the 1870s, following the Education Act, where we were all educated for our sins by Mr. and Mrs. Fentiman and a woman called Mrs. Moore. When ICI bought the Wilton Estate in the 1940s, 1946-47, they built this Wilton Green Estate here, and they brought in the original senior members of staff to start building Wilton ICI, which at that time was just a greenfield site. There was nothing there at all. But what's strange about it is, if you look at the numbers of the houses go from 26 to 31, and from 38 to 43. And the reason being that these houses here, 27, 28, 29 and 30, and then these houses here, were never built. But they, for some strange reason, they didn't renumber the houses, which was very, very odd. They were designed by a chap who lived in the end house here. This was 12 Western Road, and it was a chap called Mr. Thornley. He designed them. And they were very odd in that, because of the rationing of wood, the ground floors were all made of bitumen. And all the furniture the casters and the furniture used to sink into it, making little holes. And Mr. Thornley was also the designer of the new monument at Eston Nab, when they blew up the original Napoleonic lookout. He designed the little obelisk, the little monument which stands up there now. The people who moved into Wilton Green, these ICI executives, they came from all over the world. Many of them had of course been fighting during the Second World War. I remember one, Mr. Pluck, had been in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. Had an absolutely terrible time. And he never talked about it. Them were, of course, from the south of England, and they spoke as a really posh. And Wilton Green was known by the villagers as Snob Hill, or which was in village vernacular was known as Nob Hill. So Lazenby was divided basically into two bits. There was the village, the old part with the original residents, and Wilton Green, Nob Hill. And this is the footpath which ran to Lazenby and then down to Grangetown and Eston. And this barn here was rented by a farmer called Gale from Lazenby. And then the last development which took place is Chestnut Close, which is a series of all people's bungalows. And then lastly the garage. This had been the blacksmiths. When I was a kid, this was the blacksmiths. Mr. Lister was the blacksmith. And eventually it was taken over, the blacksmiths disappeared, and it just became a garage. But now that's all gone, and there are small houses built on here now. And that's it. This house on the corner used to be the chip shop. It was run by a family called Pearsons in my time. And this was a building which had been owned by Turners, but Mr. Ruddock, who lived in this bungalow, he had a little business in there. But eventually that was sold, and this little Lilac Close estate was built in there in the 1964. This was the chapel with a very fancy stained glass window. On the corner here was the post office, Agnes's. Mrs. O'Dowd ran it. There were a couple of pubs. This was the Half Moon, this was the Nag's Head. There was a butcher's shop here, and then on this corner here was a little shop run by a woman called Ada Scaife. She used to sell sweets and things. It was a sort of tuck shop for the school. Round the back of the chapel was the chapel schoolhouse, where we had our school dinners. We used to have to sort of march down from here. and the school dinners were brought in big aluminium containers from somewhere near Yarm. They were absolutely awful. And also this is Queen Street. There used to be a chapel there, Wesleyan Chapel. It's still the date stone is still there, but it was a fruit shop run by a fella called Peach. It never amounted to much. And the other side of the road was the butcher's. It was Foster and Allison used to run it, and then they eventually sold it. And at the back of it was a slaughterhouse where they used to slaughter the animals on a Thursday. You come up the road going towards Eston. This was the police house. The first policeman I can remember was a man called Mr. Matson. If he was chasing you, he used to follow you everywhere on his bike. It didn't matter where you went. He was either shoving it or riding it, but he never left it behind. He had a sort of big moustache. And he was followed by a man called Mr. Ward, P.C. Ward, also with a big moustache. But he didn't have a bike, he just had a big bull mastiff, which he threatened to let loose if he ran away. And then after him came a chap called Clarkson, P.C. Clarkson, who wasn't very popular at all. He eventually went to work in security at ICI. And then after that, there wasn't a village policeman, and I think that it's been sold now. It's just a private house. And this was a village playground. On the edge of Wilton Green here. It had swings and a little roundabout, and at one stage it had an old tractor, sort of half buried, which the kid used to play on, but I suppose health and safety put paid to all of that. This reservoir was built in the late 1940s. I remember them digging it out. And the spoil was piled up all the way down here in a great big heap, which is now the embankment for Greystones Road. But that's the spoil out of this reservoir here. And then running right across the middle of this is what became Lazenby bypass. This is outside the Half Moon in Lazenby. It was taken about 1880s. And this is just behind this wall is where the pump used to be. It's called Pump Square. This is called Pump Square, and these ladies here are at the water pump. And these are the names of the people who were living there in the 1950s. After this, it was where the village telephone box stood, and telephone box address was Pump Square, although the pump had long since gone by then. And this is Pump Square as it is in 2005. Not a vast lot different. So this is Pump Square. No pump, no telephone box, no evidence that it was ever called Pump Square. And next to it is the Half Moon. And then what used to be the garage is now these cottages, Farrier Mews.
obviously called Farrier Mews, obviously a reference to when it used to be the blacksmith shop when Lister's had it. After, oh, that closed in the 50s. And then it became the garage, and now it's that's all gone, and this is Queen Street, about 1905, and you can see these houses which were below street level. It's all been levelled off now. These were demolished in the early 1950s, and this is now the garden area, and this is the Nag's Head pub. This is a photograph of old Mrs. Winter, this lady here. If you look here, you can just see the houses of Turner Terrace. So this was opposite Turner Terrace, and you came down these steps, and there was a row of houses down here, well below the level of the road, where Ken Makin lived, and Hemmingsley, and can't think of the name of the other family. When Parrington Place was built, these houses were all demolished, and this was all filled in up to the level of the road, and is now a sort of garden area opposite Turner Terrace. It's Queen Street on the 2000. The building on the right is the Nag's Head pub. Several views of this. Top end of Queen Street. It used to be called Fiddler Street, and then they changed the name. I noticed that the Nag's Head is for sale. And down the bottom of here is Turner's Yard, and they've all gone as well. This is the little green as it is now, but this has all been filled in. This is where these houses used to be, below the level of the road, and then just behind that big beech tree there used to stand the Village Institute. This is Lazenby 2013, and on the other side is the school, now the village hall. This is 1988, when the Nag's Head had been revamped. This fellow is Freddie Brighton. His brother Randall Brighton was the very last man to be killed in Heston Mines in 1949. Tragic. This is the High Street, taken, I think it was 1926, the old lady who lent me this photograph. This is the school you can see here on the right hand side. This is where Turner Terrace is now. In those days it was Turner's Orchard, and Turner's farmer's friends, Charlie Turner, lived in this big house here. These people here were apparently on their way to play football at White Garth football pitch just near Lazenby, which was about, I would think it was a good 15 minutes walk away. And you can just see those houses which were below the street level there. You can just see the corner of them. And there's some steps down here, where that photograph of old Mrs. Winter was taken. There's some steps go down at this point here. Those houses there. And of course the railings were still there from the school. They were all taken away during the war. And in the background there you can see Parrington Farm, which has since been demolished, and is now a part of a playground for children. And this is another early photograph of Lazenby. This was taken around about 1900. The one thing you notice it's missing, there are no
street lights and no electricity. When the electricity came, they put in great big iron poles. There was one here, great big metal post. When you were sitting on this seat here outside the institute, if you let fly at it with a catapult, it made a resounding ring. As long as the policeman wasn't about. They had a nasty habit of confiscating catapults. Of course, that building on the right is Lazenby School. Still has the railings right round.
And this is the scene as it was in 1967. You can see that Turner Terrace has been built. These houses have gone. Just on the left hand side here was where the institute stood for many, many years. The old institute with a tin sheet roof. And you can see there that in 1967 Parrington Farm was still there where Lamberts lived.
There are many photographs of this. This is 2013, so I'll just add to them. Lazenby High Street. That's the War Memorial, looking much better than I remember it. Obviously much better, much more cared for now. Well, the constraints of YouTube mean that this video's had to be divided into two. So this is the end of part 1.